Can you hear me well?
Yeah, welcome, sir. Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Dukhabandhu Shahu, sir, are you there? Can you hear me, sir?
Dr. Saha, your microphone is muted. Dr. Saha, you are not audible. Your microphone is muted.
Yes, sir.
Now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Okay. Sir, you are not visible, sir.
That's fine. That's fine.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Your voice is breaking,
Waiting
sir.
for. Okay.
Sir, your voice is breaking. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all. Thanks for joining today's webinar on topic Economic Growth and the Environment, a Trade-off. I'm Dr. Apurva Sahai, Assistant Professor, ASBM University, and I'm your moderator for today. I take this opportunity to welcome all the participants, our President, Sir, our Vice Chancellor, Sir, and Pro VC, Ma'am, all faculty members and staff, other esteemed guests, and last but not least, our guest speakers for the day. The topic is quite a debatable one. India, at its current stage of development, should it ignore environmental costs for the sake of development? Or should there be a preference for environmental protection over economic growth? Is there any middle path? We have seen number of clashes, ideological as well as real ones. We have seen locals resisting setting up of any type of industry in certain areas having economic or natural advantages, but at the same time being ecologically sensitive. How can all the stakeholders, the governments, the industry, and the locals come together and ensure a win-win? To discuss this and more, today we have with us three esteemed speakers who will share their perspective on this challenging issue. Okay, audience is requested to keep their mic on mute and video switched off. We will be taking up the questions towards the end of the session. Audience can send in their questions in chat box and we will put it before the guest speaker. So today we have with us three esteemed guests. Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay, Dr. Mithali Chinara, and Dr. Dukhabandhu Shahu. Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay is currently a professor in the area of economics at the Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode. He is also the chair, International Relations in Management at IIM Kozhikode. He has earned his PhD from the University of Rochester. Prior to that, he received his bachelor and master degrees in statistics from the Indian Statistical Institute. An applied economist, his contribution in research lies in the areas like development economics and labor economics. His research interest also extends to the spheres of interdisciplinary research, including urban management. He has numerous publications to his credit, and his research articles have appeared in international journals like Economics Letters, Economic Modeling, Physica A, Economics Quarterly, and many more. He has a wide teaching experience in reputed institutes like University of Rochester, Indian Statistical Institute, Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode. Apart from this, he also contributes to training and consultancy, being involved with clients like Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Indian Army, Reliance Industries. Welcome, sir. Over to you. Okay. Sorry, sir. Shall I introduce two more speakers right now? Yeah. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Mithali Chinara. Dr. Mithali Chinara is Professor and Head of Economics Department at Utkal University. Her area of interest are economics of social sector, quantitative techniques, econometrics, and macroeconomics. Mithali Chinara, Dr. Mithali Chinara finished with highest grades in her master's class in analytical and applied economics at Utkal University, Odisha, bagging the university gold medal. She continued her academic voyage during an MPhil and later a PhD in economics. She has taught various courses at the undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels in some of the most reputed colleges of Odisha for close to 20 years. With numerous research papers, books, and reports to her credit, she has delivered keynote addresses at several national and international conferences. Currently, she is also the director of UGC, Human Resources Development Center, Utkal University, which trains teachers across disciplines. She is also the co-coordinator of the World Bank funded Center of Excellence in Studies in Tribal and Marginalized Communities. Welcome, ma'am. And our third speaker for the day is Dr. Dukhabandhu Shahu. Dr. Dukhabandhu Shahu is a senior faculty in economics at the School of Humanities, Social Sciences and Management, Indian Institute of Technology, Bhubaneswar. He completed his PhD in 2007 and has over 17 years of extensive research and teaching experience in open macroeconomics, applied econometrics, industrial economics, environmental economics, development economics, and social sector economics with public policy. He has published 50 plus research papers in various refereed journals and also published 3 books. His research papers have been presented in more than 40 conferences. He has also worked in various capacities as a consultant, project coordinator, health policy analyst, visiting professor, and research fellow in organizations. Organizations like World Bank, World Intellectual Property Organization, United Nations University World Institute for Development, Economics Research, and Asian Development Bank Institute, ADBI, national and state governments of India. Now I will call upon Dr. Kaushik to address and share his view. I welcome you, sir, and over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your kind invitation and opportunity to share my opinion on the issue, which is a pressing one. Um, I mean, I am trying to share some slides with the audience. I don't see I mean, I see the slide, but I don't see the slides inside.
The slide is visible, sir.
Slide is visible. Okay, great. Thanks. Um, so I'll talk a little bit theoretical way. Why we actually can we see some conflict between economic growth and environmental sustainability. In actually, there should not be any conflict at all, because as a human being, we have this. We are as one, right? I mean, it's not right. One part of us is seeking growth, other part it is not. It is that we have a one aspiration, human aspiration. Maybe I'll just talk about little bit about the framework, and then it will be clear. So those who have done economics, they know it very well. Then all the economics lessons start with something called a utility function. So essentially, in economics, we think that there is a happiness out there, and that happiness can be obtained only by consumption. Only by consumption. This view is rather a myopic one. I do not deny that, of course, consumption is very much required to an extent. We all require the basic necessities of life and sometimes a little bit of luxury. But it is not that if you increase consumption over and over and over again, people will tend to be very happy. So I give you one or two examples, rather empirical facts. One is, after the Second World War, the prosperity we are enjoying, common people, is unprecedented. In India, of course, we can see those who grew up like in my generation, a little older than me, they can see a sea change in consumption level. Same thing applies to the first world countries as well as all countries of the world. So now, I mean, more or less, we can see the material prosperity for common people was probably never been this high ever. And does all this consumption make us happy? So the answer is not exactly yes. As a matter of fact, we look for look for unhappiness in the world. And how would we really measure? How would we really assess how much people are unhappy? So there are different ways to measure that. One way is to look at the depression tablets or depression, how many people are suffering from. Now, if you see the number of people who are suffering from depression, that is rising probably faster than economic growth. So it is increasing very fast over the years. And some people may argue, well, before depression was not thought of a disease. Now people understand depression to be disease, and that's why they are coming forward. But that is also not true. Well, even though depression is not depends on your own self-assessment or something like that. But what is completely objective is suicide rates. Suicide rates all over the world has also gone up. Very similarly, it has gone up 10 times after the Second World War. So there is definitely more consumption may not actually make us more happy. Of course, we need some consumption, but too much consumption may not be actually right. And there are other questions of growth. Growth requires more energy. Before we used to pedal our bicycle, not that much energy. muscle power, right? And now we grow and we buy a car. We require the fossil fuels, right, like petroleum to run it. The average, the estimate is the modern man uses 60 times more energy than the Stone Age man. Now, suppose you want to grow in the same rate in the future. Do you have the energy? Now, if you are thinking about, only fossil fuels, of course, we all understand fossil fuels won't last long and things are not very well. Already, I mean, there's a crisis coming very soon. And if we think about solar energy, renewable energy, we tap at least 60% of the solar, 70% of the solar energy in the earth, and some part, and then to use them, we require really a lot of things. But even then, we cannot really increase the solar energy too much. I mean, we can increase it maximum this growth path for 200 years. That's a very, very hopeful estimate. I would say maybe 30-40 years is at max. Now we go to but then I mean, so there we can all understand then there is an obvious problem, because in economics the way it is taught that we need to maximize consumption, but firstly maximizing consumption does not maximize happiness, and secondly it is sometimes, I mean, more often than not possible to go in that path. So I'll talk about a paper that was written by Lynn White in a very prestigious journal called Science. It appeared in 1967. And he talked about the historical roots of this ecological crisis, Lynn White. In this worldview, that worldview that, we require more consumption without looking at anything else, it is a Protestant worldview. And that is what, I mean, that's what the Lynn White writes. And this actually came in this 15th, 16th century, 16th, 17th century, and then West start on expanding. They colonized the entire world. And eventually there is a self-contradiction that came, because the interests of different nations of the West were at conflict with each other. And this led to two great wars in the last century. And after that, this colonization model failed completely. A decolonization started happening. But now, as decolonization started happening, you can't really ignore the other people, non-European people. And that's why the consumption has shoot up without thinking about the environmental sustainability. If the world at the moment, if we actually, all of the persons in the world, we use as much resources as an average American do, we require 4 Earths. So for this population that we have now, we require 4 Earths to do it in a sustainable way. Of course, we don't have 4 Earths, we have only 1 Earth. So this is very unsustainable model that we are basing upon our civilization. So this unsustainability of our civilizational model is coming out as a contradiction between economic growth and environmental sustainability. Now, it is not true that the world did not have any other model. There are many other models that are already there. And so one of the professors of IIM Ahmedabad, Satish Deodhar, he wrote a book, Economic Sutra. So it is talked about the economic thoughts that is coming in Indian classical texts. How did you view this world? And the way we viewed this world, we viewed as an equilibrium again. And this is there are 3 forces in this equilibrium. One is, of course, karma, which is the desire. Then there is a artha, which is the economic system or socio-political system. And third is dharma, which is basically sustainable laws. It is not religion. It is just sustainable universal laws. Now, this equilibrium is something that is required to have. So if we have too much of desire for artha, then what happens? Then the sustainability, the dharma is kind of a trouble. If you have too much desire, kama, then both dharma and artha will be in trouble. And if we have too much dharma, then this basically we only look at sustainability but we don't do anything else, then of course artha and kama may not arise at all. So for a reasonable, sustainable civilization, we require the balance of these three forces. Now, question is then how do you ensure happiness to people? Now, to ensure happiness to people, we don't really require artha or more and more consumption all the time. We need more and more art forms. Dance, music, and there are many of them. There are 64 kalas mentioned. And we also require brain trainings. We require to train our brain how to get happiness. So this is what is the West is now discovering it. They are discovering mindfulness, meditation, vipassana. These are like brain trainings. I'll have one more slides. Now this path, that this growth from growth to how to measure this kind of a thing. So nowadays we measure the country's prosperity with GDP, right? So America is one of the most, actually the most prosperous country. It has a GDP of $15 trillion. We in India, we have a GDP of a little less than $3 trillion, and we aspire to make it $5 trillion. But this aspiration for GDP is not the very lasting one, as it is becoming self-evident. Because you cannot really grow so much, at least as a planet. As India or some developing countries, how much they will do, that depends on the context. I think other speakers will enlighten us. But then there is a measurement. So that measurement nowadays is being proposed. One of them is called donut economics. So this is an American suite called donut. And this donut economics, it has two things, avenues. The inside layer is basically the human aspirations for fairness, justice, equalities, so like energy, water, food, health, education, and all those things, as we can distribute to people. So this inner ring strings, as we have more and more equitable distribution. The outer ring is basically how the ecological, it's called ecological ceiling. So basically how we are pushing forward. So if the ocean, if the climate change is kind of being thwarted, the outer ring pushes. If the ozone layer depletion doesn't happen or depletes less, then the outer ring pushes more. If air pollution indices are less, then of course outer ring pushes more. So we want to look at the size of the donut. That environment is more and more, and social foundations are less and less. And that is probably the way the future economies, by future I don't mean really a long future, maybe in a decade or so, the focus of the world will come from growth to this. So I think my time is up, and also there are other distinguished speakers who can take up different other perspectives of the same topic. I close my talk here today. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for your such an important deliberation on this topic. Now I request Dr. Mithali to deliver or share on this topic. Welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Dr. Sahai, and my co-panelists for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this platform. Actually, what it has done is that it has. I don't have a PowerPoint because I hope I have some points to make. So because the time is short, I thought I will speak it simple. I will be sharing some of my views, and these views are mostly, I would say that these views are mostly kind of thinking aloud. So I'll be thinking aloud. All of us are, we are aware of what is happening. So I will, instead of, I'll dive straight away, go away to this conflict or this, is there a trade-off? Does a trade-off exist between, as the topic says, between economic growth and, environment? The thing is that, as my previous speaker has already pointed out, we have in a pursuit of happiness, and we have equate happiness with acquiring more and more of material things. I would like to start with a report in which was submitted by a group of economists in the year 1972, which is known as the Club of Rome report, and it came up later on in the form of a book, which is referred to as the Limits to Growth. And in that, it clearly stated that if the present growth trend in the world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. And the most probable results will be a rather sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity by the year 2072. The same Club of Rome, after 30 years, they submitted a kind of an update of their statement, and after 30 years, they said that we are much more pessimistic about our global future than we were in 1972. It's a sad fact that humanity has, I'm quoting it from their book, from their report, humanity has largely squandered the past 30 years in futile debates and well-intentioned but half-hearted responses to global ecological challenge. We do not have another 30 years to deter. Much will have to change if ongoing overshoot is not to be followed by collapse during the 21st century. So they were basically talking about the mankind or our human activities in an overshoot. Resource and emission constraints have created many crises since the publication of the Club of Rome report in 1972. The symptoms of this, if you call this overshoot as the disease, then the symptoms of the disease has materialized in the form of various things which has happened, all of us are aware, in the form of decline in oil production in important nations, the thinning of the stratosphere, rising of the global temperature, widespread persistence of hunger, the widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the escalating debates over the location for disposal of toxic waste, and so on and so forth. And all these, all these symptoms that we are talking about point out that the physical growth constraints are an important aspect of global policy arena in the 21st century. So the basic question that we are concerned with or we are debating is, will the world be able to sustain economic growth indefinitely without running into a resource constraint or without spoiling the environment or without harming the environment to a point which is beyond repair or beyond reprieve? What is the relationship between a steady increase in incomes and the environmental quality? Does a trade-off exist between the goals of achieving high and sustainable rates of economic growth and attaining high environmental quality? Okay, so towards that end, we see that as the economic activity grows and economic activity in the form of both production and consumption, as has been pointed out, it requires greater inputs of energy and material. And what is more important, that it generates larger quantities of waste byproducts, increased extraction of it calls for increased extraction of natural resources, accumulation of waste, Concentration of pollutants will therefore overwhelm the carrying capacity of the biosphere and result in degradation of environmental quality, as well as this will automatically, willy-nilly, whether you like it or not, whether you desire it or not, it will lead to a decline in human welfare despite rising income. We'll have more, we'll have plenty as we desire. But if the quality, what about the quality of human life? We see today what we are facing in the current times. The present times are what do you say is a situation where we can see that we have plenty. We are in the midst of plenty, but we are in a very desperate state. Okay, we'd like to go back to the previous having less, but without the current problems. Now, it is also argued that degradation of resource base will eventually put the economic activity itself at risk. Okay, so this uncontrolled economic activity, or we can say that this kind of pursuit of economic activity in an uncontrolled manner will ultimately put the economic activity itself into trouble. To save the environment and even economic activity from itself, economic growth, maybe we can think that economic growth must cease and we must come to a steady state economy. Now, this is one view. At the other extreme are another group of economists who argue that the fastest road to environmental improvement is along the path of economic growth. Higher incomes with higher incomes comes increased demand for goods and services that are less material intensive, and the demand for at higher levels of income also, the demand for improved environmental quality also goes up. That leads to adoption of environmental protection measures. In 1992, another economist, Wilfred Beckerman, says that in the longest, he wrote an article, Economic Growth and Environment, Whose Growth, Whose Environment? And he says, maybe that in the longer run, the surest way to improve your environment is to become rich. This is another view. And some went as far as claiming that environmental regulation by reducing economic growth may actually reduce environmental quality. Now, in between these, there has been a view which is commonly known as what is referred to as the environmental Kuznets curve, which shows that, or which hypothesizes that, relationship between economic growth and environmental quality is not monotonic. Monotonic means not that it's straightforward. It is not straightforward. It implies, or environmental Kuznets curve, which is derived by an analogy with the income inequality relationship given by Kuznets. It says that it is an inverted U kind of a relationship. At lower levels of development, both the quantity as well as the intensity of environmental degradation are limited to the impact of subsistence economic activity on the resource base. And to limited quantity, it is also limited to lesser amount of biodegradable wastes. As agriculture and resource extraction, as we move ahead in the path of growth and development, as agriculture and resource extraction gradually increases and industrialization gradually takes root, both resource depletion and waste generation accelerate. And that means as we move on the path of development, gradually environmental degradation goes up. But at a sufficiently higher level of development, at a sufficiently higher level of per capita GDP, or growth to be more specific, growth which is measured by per capita GDP, structural change towards our information-based industries and services, more efficient technologies, and increased demand for environmental quality result in leveling up, and then environmental, once again, as you proceed beyond that, your environmental degradation starts coming down. So the shape is an inverted U shape. Everyone, I'm sure, is acquainted with the environmental Kuznets curve. The issue is whether environmental degradation and economic growth relationship, what kind of a relationship? Does it increase monotonically, as one group says? Does it decrease monotonically, as another group says? Or does it have the environmental Kuznets curve kind of a relationship where it first increases, then declines? And this, what is the reality? What is the reality? This has got important policy implications. What we should do. What we should do. Okay. So towards that end, several research studies have been taken up to look at what kind of a relationship does growth have with environmental degradation or environmental quality. There has been a lot of research. I'm not going to quote all of that, but I will flag off some of the important research questions. At what level of per capita income is the turning point? Where does it stop? We're talking about an increasing more and more degraded or higher rate of degradation with growth, and then after a point of time there is a turn down. But where does it turn down? And how much damage would have taken place by the time we reach a turn down? And can it be avoided? Now, the question is, by the time we reach the turn down, is the environment still in a state where we can recover, we can have some kind of a repair? Would ecological thresholds be violated and irreversible damage take place before environmental degradation turns down? Okay, so this is another issue. Is environmental improvement at higher levels of income automatic? Does it happen on its own? Or does it require conscious institutional policy reforms? Does it require interventions? Does it require, active policies? Now, how to accelerate development process so that developing and transition economies, this is more important in the context of India. So, how to accelerate the development process so that developing and transition economies can attain the same improved economic and environmental conditions enjoyed by the developed market economies. Now, as I have already said, a plethora of studies have been carried out with contradictory results at times. Why contradictory? The reason is that they have been carried over different points of time, at different space and time, and sometimes it is questioned whether a study carried out in the context of a group of economies or carried out in a particular economy is applicable in another setup. And new variables have been brought to the picture. For example, like what is in this kind of a relationship, environmental quality or environmental degradation and economic growth, what is the role of trade openness? What is the role of the flow of foreign direct investment? What is the role of the size of government and economic freedom? I want to quote three important studies of recent times, one in which was carried out in Singapore, an Asian country, a city-state. Now, it said the results carried out, they tried to study the data on carbon dioxide emission, energy consumption, and per capita GDP for the period 75 to 2011. The result indicates that there is what is important is that as carbon dioxide emissions, which is regarded as one of the marks of environmental degradation, as it increased with GDP increase with higher GDP, and there exists a short-term trade-off between environment and growth. Further analysis shows that there may be a possible turning point if continuous growth takes place. But the results of causality analysis indicate that carbon dioxide emissions indeed have caused decline in Singapore's growth. Therefore, it concludes that strict regulatory regimes are necessary for environmental protection. Now, another study carried out in taking some developing economies with basically to look at the validity of Kuchnet's type of inverted U-shaped relationship between economic growth and environmental efficiency. The estimates do not conform in a Kuchnet type of relationship between economic growth and environmental efficiency in terms of two pollutants they have taken. One is carbon dioxide and another is sulfur dioxide. In fact, instead of an inverted U-shaped relationship, they came across an inverted N-shaped of relationship between economic growth and environmental degradation. Hence, the results suggest that while economic growth to some extent could be a remedy for environmental degradation in terms of carbon dioxide emission, it is not a remedy for sulfur dioxide emission. Now, another important variable that they have studied is the impact of FDI on environmental efficiency in the context, especially in the context of developing economies. Now, it is generally believed that the FDI improves the environmental quality of the host economy by enhancing resource use. This is the basic belief with which we progress, with resource use efficiency of domestic farms through technology spillover effect. But it was seen that impact of FDI on environmental efficiency in the context of developing economies is not at all favorable. The host developing economies may actually attract dirty technologies only to along with the flow of the FDI into the developing economies from another set of developing economies, because the host economy has lower environmental standards. Okay, a similar report was also seen in case of India. In case of India also, we saw that there is another study also found that FDI instead of FDI, foreign direct investment, instead of improving, or it has an adverse impact on environment in the long run, the short run impact on environment might be favorable. This indicates that India, like other developing countries, attracts FDI in polluting industries, maybe because of lower environmental standards. This incentivizes heavy polluters to move to countries with lower environmental standards or environmental regulations, right? Now, this has given rise to what is known as the pollution haven hypothesis, which talks that FDI may not be as favorable to environmental standards as is generally believed. Now, another study, the third and the last study I would like to quote is the context of India, which says that carbon emission begins to decline once the threshold level of per capita GDP is reached. And it also says that rise in fuel price leads to reduction in carbon emission, and increase in petroleum consumption promotes emissions, right? So we can generally say that whatever, as I started, that the studies indicate contradictory results, and you may or may not accept the studies, you may or may not accept the data set, you may or may not accept the methodology, they have adopted different methods, but the fact remains that the world which stares at us at the current point of time, it clearly says that we do not have time to deter. We do not have time to ignore it anymore. We cannot brush the environmental concerns below the carpet and proceed with the single-minded concentration to promotion of production and consumption. We need to adopt environmental policies to control environmental degradation. This is a need of the hour. Unless we do, maybe it will be too late, and we will reach a state where it is no longer possible to go back to the previous state. Now, we have to promote what is more important. What is important is also that we have to look at more efficient, promoting renewable energy resources and more energy efficient technologies. Now, I would like to end my deliberations with a quote that the environment or the world, as has been pointed out by my previous speaker, he says that if we continue with our current consumption and production standards, we would require 4 planets. Do we have 4 planets? The answer is a clear-cut no. We have one and only one. We do not even have a planet B. And I would like to take another adage that the planet that we have is not what we have inherited from our forefathers or our people who have preceded us on this planet, but it's what we have borrowed from our next generation. So we have the responsibility to give them at least a planet which is as good as we have got, or if possible, a better planet than what we have inherited. So our consumption pattern, if our consumption pattern does not change, all of us will have to be careful, and it has to be written clearly into policies in order to protect it, in order to preserve it for our generation next. I will rest my argument here. Thank you so much. The Dr. Sahai, I think you are muted.
Okay. Oh, thanks for sharing your views, ma'am. And now I welcome Dr. Shafi to deliver his speech.
Thank you, Dr. Sai. And
sir.
thank you, Madam. Madam, namaskar. Mithali, madam. So, am I audible?
Namaskar, namaskar.
Okay. Am I audible,
Yes,
ma'am?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Because actually, it's during Madam's talk. Actually, she was not clearly audible because I am actually at a very geographically disadvantageous place. So probably that's the reason. So it's I think I am audible. So it's
Yes, sir.
and ma'am, thanks, ma'am Apurva, for thanks for your nice introduction. In fact, little bit
Welcome.
exaggerated introduction of me. See, it's the topic being the speaker who speaks last. Actually, I have this advantage of drawing some ideas from my previous speakers and putting for my views. I won't argue. In fact, actually, I'll just put my views. See, it's what Professor Gangopadhyay has said, that after the Second World War, there has been a surge or huge increase in the consumption of the people, and that consumption required output. That consumption required your economic growth, because we know economic growth is the increase in your per capita. Economic growth is increase in your per capita output, and that can be done by increasing your total output or by reducing population. But population has been growing over a period of time. Probably in the history, if I take the Indian case, just after the independence, just after the First World War, there was a slight or reduction in the population, but over a period of time, the population has been growing. So, if the world economy aspire to achieve higher growth, there is no doubt that we need to increase our output. As a student of economics, what I have understood, that higher economic growth can be achieved either, or that for matter, higher output can be achieved either by increasing your input and or by improving your technology. You can increase the output. If that is the case, if your growth is input driven, and we all know that the input or the resources of the globe are limited, then definitely higher economic growth is going to put pressure on your inputs or your resources. And on the other hand, growing population reduces the per capita availability of resources. Reduction in the per capita available of resources, coupled with our aspiration to achieve higher growth, compels us at many times to achieve growth through input driven mechanism. That's why inputs get depleted, and as Professor Gangopadhyay said, also later Mithali ma'am also said, that if the whole world goes with the consumption level of the developed country, particularly America, this is cited, then we require poor earth. It means actually we require resources which are available in this earth 4 times than what it is today. So then the question comes here: can we compromise, or can we put a stop on our growth aspirations and preserve the resources and ultimately the environment, or we need to achieve, or we can indiscriminately put pressure on our resources or environment and achieve higher growth, or we need to maintain a balance. I also I'm not sure. I'll just put certain ideas or certain studies and put my views what we require. We cannot go back. We require higher growth. This is what actually the thought of the day, because the developed world has already exploited resources, already exploited the environment and achieved their standard of living. The developing world is trying to catch up, as Professor Gangopadhyay says, that we are aspiring for a 3 trillion economy, where the American economy is already a 15 trillion economy. Those developed world have already exploited the environment and the earth for their greatest living standard. But it doesn't matter really. What concerns for the developing world is like this: we require at least a minimum standard of living. For that minimum standard of living, we require better output. For that better output, we require better input or better technology. There comes the second part, what Mithali Madam actually was highlighting, that FDI, or to my understanding, if we can say the globalization, which was triggered or which was accelerated after the new economy, especially towards the end of the last century, from 1990 onwards, the whole new economy with the advent of ICT, globalization, speed up. What globalization would have helped or could help for this developing world, that they can help this developing world to grow faster, to achieve higher growth through in technology-driven growth model, not by input-driven growth model. And this technology, particularly green technology, could be imported or could be hired from the developed world. Because I'll cite an article by Eric Good, who claimed that the environmental degradation in the developed world is less than what is there in the developing world. Well, probably she was conveniently arguing that the developing world is exploiting the environment much more than what the developed world is doing. And she also cited some studies of WHO, World Health Organization, to give strength to her argument. But what has happened actually? Those developed countries or developed world have their sufficient income to spend on research and development and to come out with better technology, which they call greener technology, in their production process. And to reach that level of growth, or to that level of economic growth, you require some sort of impetus in the form of input or in the form of technology. Many a times, this developed world, during the course of their globalization, either to FDI, of course, FPI, foreign portfolio investment, may not help, either through FDI or technology transfer. They do not transfer the technology because of the intellectual property rights, IPR Acts. And that's why these aspiring developing countries call on a growth strategy which is input driven, putting pressure on the environment. So it's in the new era of this globalized world, or in new economy eras, the developed economies need to support the developing economies in the form of better technology, in fact, greener technology, to achieve higher growth, because they are at a higher standard of living, whereas the developing world is languishing. In fact, I'll cite one of my studies, or our studies. In fact, I have done it with my student for the ADBI, Asian Development Bank Institute. We tried to find out the impact of this globalization. We tried to find out the impact of this globalization on the greenhouse gas emissions in the middle income countries, particularly the developing countries. What is startling in our studies, contrary to what Eric Good has claimed, our study has confirmed that the greenhouse emission in the developing world is lesser as compared to the developed world. And it can be reduced only with the helping hand from the developed world. There are also other studies, a couple of studies to cite. Those who cite, those who claimed that the greenhouse emissions in developed countries like OECD's countries and other developed countries is higher than the middle income countries or the developing countries. So that's the argument what Eric has put forward, because he has taken only one indicator, the cleaner air, the availability of cleaner air in different cities, 180 cities probably he had taken, and claimed that the developed countries have a better environmental quality than otherwise or than the developing countries is wrong. These developing countries or middle income countries in fact emit less greenhouses during the process of their economic globalization, because globalization has three dimensions: economic globalization, social globalization, and political globalization. But economic growth is linked to economic globalization. That's why I'm talking about economic globalization. In the era of economic globalization, or during the process of their economic globalization, developing countries emits less greenhouses than the developed nations. That's why what actually, because see, we cannot have four Earths, or we cannot have 4 times the resources what we have. We all know as a student of economics that the resources are limited. So you also know that we have this aspiration to have a better life. Better life, of course, is a qualitative term or a subjective term, is interpreted in a different way or by different individuals at different times. But to achieve that better standard of living or improved standard of living, we require economic growth. And for that, we need to have a balanced approach of technology as well as input driven growth, and that technology driven growth should be green technology driven growth, and that can be achieved. You can afford for green technology if you have higher income or if you have higher economic growth. Unfortunately, these lower income countries or the developing countries do not have that much of resources to spend on R&D and come out with greener technology for their economic growth. Thus, the developed countries need to extend their helping hand to these developing and middle income countries so that they can adopt this kind of greener technology and achieve their aspirations of having a better standard of living. We cannot also leave one part of the globe drastically languishing behind, whereas the other part of the world is living an affluent life. So whether there is a trade-off between economic growth or environment, definitely there is a trade-off. If you want to aspire a higher growth, definitely you have to put pressure on the per capita ability of your resources and on the environment. But you cannot also ignore that we require an equitable and just society as a global community, and that can be achieved by increasing the income or increasing the output or increasing the growth of the languishing states or languishing economies through greener technology, which can be done by a collaborative work by the world economy, where the developed nations need to support those developing countries through green technology. So to conclude, I can say definitely there is a trade-off, but that trade-off should not be a hurdle for some aspiring nations or aspiring developing nations to achieve a better standard of living, though not higher growth. So I stay here, I stop here, and unfortunately I couldn't prepare my slides. So ma'am, I'll be glad to take a couple of questions.
Thank you
Apurva
for
ma'am.
sharing your views. Yes, thank you, sir, for sharing your wonderful views on this topic. And now this is a question round. So this is a question for Dr. Kaushik. One of our audience has asked this question, that most of the economic activity is done by private business who are profit oriented. Donut model of economic development talks about building in regeneration of resources component by design in any economic activity. Definitely there is a cost angle to it. So how hard or easy is it to implement this?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So the way I see it, that it is also a part of our social trope, our social understanding. The private companies are all profit oriented and don't think about anything else. It is coming because of the way we kind of being told, and we kind of because of the societal outlook. It is very much possible that private companies, they actually can think about other things, and it is also possible there are some other forms of organizations which are private but not necessarily profit oriented. So I'll give one or two examples. So first example is from India, Amul. Amul is a cooperative, and it is cooperative of milkmen in Gujarat, in particular districts, 2-3 districts of Gujarat. And we know that it is a very good commercial success. I mean, it was motivated by one of the sons of Kerala, Varghese Kurian, Dr. Varghese Kurian. But then it did very well up till 1990s. It was the most productive Indian organization in terms of food and other issues. But then what happened? People used to say that, well, they are not facing any competition. So 1991 liberalization happened, and many foreign companies they joined, but still they could not, they are no match for Amul, and they have expanded the brand, and they are not simply doing business, they are also looking at the welfare of the people of the districts, of the places around, of the employees, and it is not simply profit oriented, it is a completely holistic approach. Second example I'll give is one of the most prosperous countries of the world, Israel. So Israel is started in a very shabby manner in some sense, because the land there, it was like only marshlands and wetlands and whatnot. So what they do, the early pioneers of Israel, they actually founded a form of cooperative. It's called kibbutz. So the way it is to work, these people, they used to do the farmland, they used to do this agriculture together, dine together, do things together, and they also like to produce together. So the early Israeli industries all kind of owned by this kibbutz. And this is not only profit oriented. This is a completely kind of they look at the welfare of the stakeholders, welfare of the nations. And one of the reasons that Israel survived the first onslaught, right after the birth of this country, 7 countries attacked it, 7 Arab countries attacked Israel. And they all were defeated. This is very unthinkable in the sense that this Israel, they did not have any formalized army or military before the creation, and they were attacked by 7 countries, and those 7 countries beaten back. Partly these kibbutz people, they have such an they are so dogged, they are so stubborn in their approach to hold up the land, they did not let the invaders come. So I'm just trying to say that there are other kinds of organizations which may be not owned by government exactly, maybe by people, maybe by private, but they don't look at only the profit motive. but comparatively more of a holistic concern. And and this is the same idea that Mahatma Gandhiji talked about when he talked about trusteeship. Mahatma Gandhi was not against, he was a Baniya, right? We all know. He was a proud Baniya in some sense. And he was from the Baniya caste, I mean, but and he was also he was very much supportive of business and other things. And he did not want that these private enterprises should die. He said he wanted the private enterprises to happen. But then what he said that the people who are with money, the businessmen, they should not look at a personal glory. They should utilize the money as a custodians of the society and do good work. And this is not a basically personal opinion in some sense of Gandhiji. This is the shared tradition of India. When Fa Hien, he was one of the famous Chinese traveler, he came to India in the time of the Gupta dynasty. And he was moving around India, and Fa Hien was very surprised looking at that India that time. Other places Fa Hien travel, other countries, he faced what not. I mean, robbery, theft, violence, and in the highways. But in India, he never faced such a thing. And this is the reason that Gupta dynasty, this age is called the golden age of India, because it was a foreign travelers, they vouch for the very wonderful law and order situation there. So when Fa Hien was traveling in the highways, at night, always he used to get a shelter in some kind of a place, some kind of a pansala, some kind of a, you can say like a dormitory. And there he used to be given everything. And most of the time he didn't have to even pay anything for them. And those were used to be borne by the businessmen of those times. And Fa Hien also visited the capital city, and he founded many welfare projects like hospitals and other things. And they are all donated by the private enterprises, by businessmen and other people. So this is a different kind of a model where people's value system, in societal value system, the work of the welfare activities and other things are much more high compared to what is now at the moment. Yeah. So it's not possible that everything, all of us will stay the exactly same and things will change. We have to also grow in some sense in our understanding of the world, and then and only then the world will change. Yeah, thank you.
Very true, sir. Now I move to the another question. This question is for Dr. Mithali. Some heavily polluting industries are moving from developed countries to less developed capital hungry countries. How to control this, ma'am?
So as I have already pointed out, the FDI is moving from not only from developed countries to developing. For example, the ship breaking industries are very polluting. Most of them located in the Indian coasts and all. So the only way to control it is to have strict policies. FDI, we should not accept FDI in any form or any form which is ready to come. I mean, we need capital, yes. We are capital deficient, yes. But at the same time, we should not accept it in any form it is ready to come. We should have strict a policy. I mean, what kind of we say that we are welcoming FDI, we get capital, we also get technology, but also we should have a choice. We should exercise at the policy level. FDI policy should be environmental concerns written clearly and in very unambiguous terms into our FDI policy to ensure that the FDI comes, but not at the cost of polluting our local environment or our local system. So we need strict policies, clearly written and enforceable policies also. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, next question is for Dr. Shah. Sir, China over last couple of years are shutting down many of their polluting industries like lead manufacturing. This has indirectly been positively impacting Indian businesses. What is your take on this? Should India also follow the same footsteps?
See what China is shutting down.
Yes, sir.
China is shutting which industries?
Many of their polluting industries like lead manufacturing. So this has indirectly been positively impacting Indian business also. So what is your take on this?
See, I'm not sure whether China is closing its uh, environmental means negatively affecting environmental means it's polluting industry. I'm not sure because what Eric has suggested, Eric Good has said that China is in fact promoting this kind of industry and is researching to a kind of dumping in the international market. So if any participant has observed that China is stopping its polluting industry, as Mithali Madam said, we should, of course, she said it with respect to the FDIs, but we should also have stringent policies towards those industries which are affecting the environment severely or very badly. What I mean to say very badly, well, we are also in an economy which is aspiring to grow and improve the standard of living. Let's also accept this fact that no more than 1/5 of our population are below poverty line. So we need to take them out of this poverty trap. So for that we require growth. But on the other hand, we also need to take care of our environment. If some industries are putting pressure on our resources and ultimately creating environmental hazards, then we need to have sufficient or good enough policies to encourage them for go for green technology. I won't say that stop them. Encourage them to go for a technology driven growth, and that technology should be green technology, that it shouldn't be affecting the environment that much. See, blindly, I'm not sure whether China has stopped some polluting industry, but if at all there is a suggestion, I would say that go for an alternative, and the alternative could be its green technology. So it's blindly simply stopping those industries may not be a good idea or a good suggestion for the economy.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Now, our next question is from one of our professors, that is Dr. Jyoti Ranjan. He has asked how effective environmental audit has been in India and globally in achieving environment protection. Any case study speakers can share?
See, it's ma'am. Actually, it's I haven't done any case studies as such. As I said, no, I have done a study on the impact of economic globalization on the greenhouse emissions in middle income countries. We have taken some 36 middle income countries and we're done that kind of a study. We haven't done any case studies whether environmental auditing and how this environmental auditing has effect on the environment. But what I can say like this. We have all these policies or the programs or the checks and balances for the industry like environmental auditing, social auditing, all these things. I have one suggestion, which our intention as well as implementation should be done with honesty. Because though I haven't done any study, I have some first-hand experience where environmental auditing is for who doing king. It's simply to do the IWAS. So if at all there is an environmental auditing, that should be done with honesty, and its implementation has to be done with serenity, sincerity, and honesty. I haven't done any case study. Oh, with the other speakers, I think other speakers will be able to do. I haven't done. We have done it at a macro level. So case study, in-depth study, we haven't done. I'm sorry, but I'm saying only from my experience, whatever observations I have for some industries where there is some auditing, social auditing, because we have done for MCL, Mahanadi Coalfield Limited, social auditing and environmental auditing. And I don't hesitate to say that many of them are done for white for IWAS. You can also observe, and now I am in Jaspur. There are many plants here. They display the what you call air quality and other things of, and actually with due respect, I seriously doubt those parameters which are displayed there.
Thank you, sir. It's indeed been an excellent and insightful session on the topic. We got multiple perspectives to the issue from all our speakers. Both economic activity and environment impact each other. The policy should be made to exploit synergies and minimize trade-offs between environmental effectiveness and economic efficiency. Dr. Kaushik shared relevant point if GDP can be a good indicator of development. He talked about the donut model and highlighted about development activity having resource regeneration component by design. Very relevant point by Dr. Mithali was whether continued growth can be achieved endlessly without regeneration of natural resources. We are currently not thinking about this. She also shared view that fastest economic growth will automatically create demand for better quality of life and better environment, which will then lead to environment protection. While the entire world talks about the environment conservation, however, Dr. Shahu raised a very pertinent point that the developed world have already overexploited the environment to reach this level of development. Can the less developed countries follow the same path? Thank you, Dr. Mithali, Dr. Kaushik, and Dr. Shahu for taking out time for this webinar. I also thank the audience for participating and making this webinar a success. I also thank President Sir, Vice Chancellor Sir, and Pro VC Ma'am for having given me the opportunity to conduct this webinar. Lastly, my sincere thanks to all the members of the webinar team of ASBM for successfully hosting this webinar. Thank you all, and we look forward to your participation in our upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the entire SBM team, all participants, and the panelists. Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Thank you, ma'am, for inviting me here.
Thank you, ma'am, for inviting and giving me an opportunity to meet and talk to my beloved ma'am. Ma'am, namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Namaskar.
Thank you so much. Thank you.